want to praise the wonders of your mighty love. My comfort, my shelter, tower of refuge and strength. Let every breath, all that I am, never cease to worship you. Shout to the Lord, all the earth, let us sing. Power and majesty, praise to the King. Mountains bow down and the seas will roll at the sound of your name. I sing for joy at the work of your hands. Forever I love you, forever I stand. Nothing compares to the promise I have in you. Sing it one more time. My Jesus, my Savior, but there is none like you. All of my days, I want to praise the wonders of your mighty love. My comfort, my shelter, tower of refuge and strength. Let every breath, all that I am, never cease to worship you. Shout to the Lord, all the earth, let us sing. Power and majesty, praise to the King. Mountains bow down and the seas will roll at the sound of your name. I sing for joy at the work of your hands. Forever I love you, forever I stand. Nothing compares to the promise I have in you. Nothing compares to the promise I have in you.
Thanks, Sulina, and thanks for joining us again. We'll hand it over to Dr. Jacob Chaco now for continuing his series. Over to you, sir.
Just try to share the screen. See the screen?
Yes, so we can see it. You can probably go on to slideshow and.
Yes.
Yes.
At this time, we have taken this time to be in God's presence at the end of a busy day. I just want to share a few thoughts about Joseph's life. All of us are in God's school. God has enrolled us in his school and he is working on our lives. He is refining us. He is polishing us. He's breaking some parts. and He's making His image and molding us. And we never graduate from God's school till our dying day. We are all in God's school. God is working on us till our dying day. So I just want to share a few thoughts. We are familiar with Joseph's life. I won't spend much time on his early days, but what are the lessons that Joseph was transformed? What are the ways in which he was transformed? We know this, that he was born through Rachel, and at a young lad of 17 years, he was thoroughly spoiled, favored by his father. He gave a bad report of his brothers to his father, and his brothers hated him. Father showed favoritism, gave him a tunic of many colors, and brothers hated him all the more. And to add to this, Joseph's dreams, we know his dreams, 11 sheaves bowing to his sheaf. And then one step further, even the sun and moon and the 11 stars bowed down to him. So his brothers hated him and they were jealous of him. The young boy, Joseph, at 17 years, without wisdom or discretion or tact, displaying the arrogance of youth, hated by his brothers. But God had to put Joseph through his school. Joseph was sent by his father to get news about his brothers and their flocks. And they said, here comes that dreamer. And we know they threw him into a dry cistern and then sold him to the Ishmaelite merchants for 20 pieces of silver. They were on their way to Egypt, and Joseph was never to return to his home again. He was sold to Potiphar, we know. And the significant thing that we read here is the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph wherever he went. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything that he owned. The Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. You know the story how Joseph was tempted repeatedly by Potiphar's wife, and he said, how could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? He was falsely accused and thrown into prison. But even here, while Joseph was in prison, the Lord was with him. We read that. The Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison ward. So the warden put Joseph in charge because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. It is significant that we read that the Lord was with Joseph in all his sufferings. Disappointment even in prison. The dream of the baker and the butler while in prison, they tell Joseph about it, and Joseph doesn't say, I will tell you. He says, do not interpretations belong to God. He says, it is God who has the interpretation, and it is God who will give the interpretation, not me. And then we know how he interpreted the dream correctly. And then he pleaded with the butler, when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. But sadly, the chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. All his hopes of being released was dashed. God's time had not come yet. God was still working on Joseph. And after 2 full years, God's time had come. We know how Pharaoh had the dream of the 7 cows and the 7 heads of grain. And then the butler suddenly remembered Joseph. And Joseph was sent, hastily brought from the dungeon, shaved, changed clothes, and came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. He did not say, yes, I have the gift or the ability, like the proud 17-year-old. But he said, I cannot do it. Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. I cannot do it. God will give Pharaoh the answer. The New King James Version says, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. The transformation in the arrogant, proud Joseph. Then we know what happened, the elevation from the dungeon to the highest position in Egypt when he interpreted the dreams, and Pharaoh exalted him. I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, giving him the authority, his own authority. And he says, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt, given all the authority in the land of Egypt. Then we know what happened. The brothers, because of the severe famine, came for grain and they bowed before Joseph. In the midst of the conversation, they said, I have one other brother who is with their father. And Joseph once says, I will not, don't come and see me unless you bring him. And then we know Benjamin is brought, and then the events, how Joseph's cup was missing, and they searched and it was found in Benjamin's sack. And the agreement was, whosoever's sack the cup is found will be his slave, Joseph's slave. Then they plead before Joseph. Judah says, please let me take Benjamin's place. I will be the slave. Then Joseph feels that it is time to reveal himself. I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves, for God sent me before you to preserve life. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. So what were the changes that has come over Joseph's life? Because of his prison years, because of God working in his life. First, we know that he experienced God's presence with him, even in all his afflictions, because we read that the Lord was with Joseph when he was thrown into, when he was in Potiphar's house. Then when he was falsely accused and thrown into prison, again we read the Lord was with Joseph. It was as if the Lord was suffering with Joseph. The Lord was waiting for his transformation to be complete. He experienced God's presence with him in all his afflictions. Because of his deeper experience of God as a result of his afflictions, he realized that all his abilities were given by God. They were not his. They were all given by God. And he says twice to the baker and butler, do not interpretations belong to God? And then to Pharaoh, I cannot do it. I cannot interpret it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. He realized that all that his abilities were given by God. What a transformation from the arrogant, boastful, favored boy of 17 years. Joseph, he saw the larger purposes of God working out through his life's tragic circumstances. Even though he had gone through tragic experiences, he saw that God was working out his larger purposes. God was in control. God was controlling and working out his purposes. Because Joseph tells his brothers, do not be angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth. So now it was not you who sent me, but God. Joseph realizes, although his brothers had been so mean and wicked to him, but overall it was God who was overruling even the evil circumstances and to make them work for his larger purposes. So he saw the larger purposes of God working out through his life's tragic circumstances. Then we read that Joseph forgave his brothers. When after the death of his father, the brothers thought, okay, up till now he did not take revenge because our father was still alive. But now after his death, surely he will take revenge against us. And they come and throw themselves down at his feet. And he says, we will be your servants. But Joseph reassures them, do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Do not be afraid. I will provide for you. He comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Joseph forgave his brothers. He did not take revenge. He forgave his brothers for all the evil that they had done to him. Joseph saw by faith that God would fulfill his promise to Abraham by bringing them out of Egypt to the land he had promised. Joseph would have heard Jacob telling him God's dealings with Abraham, God's call, and how God had told Abraham that to you and your descendants, I will give this promised land. But now the Israelites were in Egypt. But Joseph saw that God would fulfill his promise to Abraham by bringing them out of Egypt. God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land of which he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joseph could not visibly see that happening at that time, but through the eyes of faith, he saw that God would fulfill his purpose promised to Abraham and bring the Israelites out of Egypt to this promised land. So this is faith, and being sure of what we cannot see now because God has promised it. Being sure that God will do it even though we cannot see it being fulfilled now. And that is why Joseph has found a place in the chapter in Hebrews 11, in the chapter of heroes of faith. Finally, Joseph's transformation. He chose to identify with God's people and God's purposes, rejecting all the honors of Egypt. What did he tell his brothers? He said, there will be a time God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. He was telling his brothers, God will surely visit you and take you back to that promised land. And when you go, you must take my bones from here. Joseph's advisors would have said, Joseph, are you a fool? You are the most important person in Egypt, only next to Pharaoh. When you die, they will embalm your body with special care. They will place you in a very, very large pyramid, and they will bury various things. They will write all your achievements, all your wisdom, all the great things that you did. They will write, and generate posterity. When they dig up, they will find, here lies the remains of Joseph, who was the savior of Egypt. Joseph, are you a fool to say that to take your bones from here to an unknown grave in the land of Canaan? But Joseph chose to identify with God's people and God's purposes, rejecting all the honors of Egypt. Generations later, there would come another person who would also choose to identify with God's people, and that will be Moses. So this is what we find God's transformation in the life of Joseph, because he was in God's school. Will we allow the Lord to take us through his school, to break, melt, mold, and fill us? Will we pray, Lord, put me through your school, break me, melt me, mold me, and fill me. I submit to your loving hands. Lord, do your work, do your full work in me, and make me a vessel that you want me to be.
Thank you, sir. We'll just leave this time open for a couple of minutes if any of you want to share your own thoughts on Joseph's life or any of the points that sir mentioned. After that, we'll go to a time of prayer. If any of you want to volunteer to pray, please let me know. Just leave it open for a couple of minutes to discuss what sir taught. Just a couple of things that struck me was one is both in Joseph's life, the place which could have ultimately destroyed his life, which is what the brothers thought when they sold him as a slave. Like Sir mentioned, turned out to be God's school for him, and also turned out to be the center of God's will in his life. Through a lot of suffering that happened, that was the place that long term was in the center of his will. We see that a little bit more acute setting in when Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, and when Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego were thrown into the fire. Ideally, that would have been the place of their destruction, but it turned out to be the place where God's name was glorified and it was in the center of God's will. That's something amazing that we need to realize.